Good morning. I will call to order the Board of Clackamas County Commission policy session on this August 3rd, 2022. Administrator Gary Schmidt, what's up first?
Thank you, Chair. You have several policy sessions today. The first one is County Roads Transportation Update. Presenting today, Dan Johnson, Director of Transportation and Development, and Mike Besner, Assistant Director of Transportation and Development. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Chair Smith, Commission, Administrator Schmidt, for having us here today. We are here to give you an update about a system that we all manage. Essentially, this is one of the single biggest assets that Clackamas County owns, which is our transportation system. Just briefly to kind of run through, I'm going to go kind of quick to give Mike some more time to talk about some of the policy direction, but within your packet, it talks about the services that we provide to protect, enhance, and plan for this system, which is 1,400 linear miles. Those operations include maintenance, operations, traffic safety, capital construction, road statute administration, transportation planning, transportation development review, and regional coordination. What comprises the system? If you look at attachment A, you'll see those components that comprise what we call those assets that comprise the system. A couple of things I'm going to draw your attention to. Obviously, we've got 116,000 feet of guardrail, almost 74,000 signs. You can see extensive amount of storm drainage components that comprise that system. We are bridge heavy, about 180 bridges, and then everything which is near and dear to your heart, we own a ferry. But essentially, you can take a look at those assets that are there that comprise the system. You can take a look at the services that are also on attachment A. Let's talk a little bit about what funds this service to not only maintain but expand this asset. There are 7 unique funding sources that are outlined in your packet, essentially state highway funds, urban renewal, community road fund, strategic investment funds, state and federal grants, secure rural schools revenue, and SDC charges. These 7 unique funding sources are strategically leveraged against one another to provide the various programs and or improvements we need to this system. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Besner, who's going to have a discussion with you about the policy directives that we receive from the board that allow us to develop the strategic plan and prioritize certain improvements. So with that, Mike.
Thanks. Yeah, there's throughout the years lots and lots of touch points with the board and policymakers to help guide us on what transportation projects that we undertake or apply for. The number one is the Transportation System Plan, which is our biggest undertaking. It was adopted, the current one was adopted in 2013, and that goes through the Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners. We are in 2023, it's time for a major update to that. And there will be lots of touch points with policymakers to talk about how we want to do it, the goals, the criteria we use, and there's policies embedded in that, and it gets inserted into, it's part of the comprehensive plan for the county. Recall and I know there's talks of tiers, and you hear about tiers all the time. So just so you know, with the TSP, this is what the board helped determine too. We broke our projects into 3 priority tiers. Tier 1 was, we did an overall financial analysis and said, how much money do we think we're actually going to have in 20 years from all sources? And we figured out what that amount was. We said, all right, let's pick that many projects as Tier 1. We didn't assign a funding source to them at the time, but we said, hey, this is as good as any way to do it. So about 15% of our projects were Tier 1. And then we said, hey, if we get a little more money, we should have a Tier 2, and so we created a Tier 2, and then the bulk, 70%, are this nebulous Tier 3 that we need, but we don't anticipate funding. So that's how we did it the first time. We'll be able to revisit that with a lot of process when we start it up again next year. There's a lot of laws that govern how we do it, state law, a lot of transportation planning rule requirements. And we use this then to help develop that 5-year capital improvement plan that we come back to the board every, I think, 2 years to update. The Transportation Safety Action Plan is another one that was adopted by the board in 2019. And that is the roadmap to achieve our goal to eliminate serious injuries and fatalities from crashes by 2035. That's also a document that helps us determine safety projects, and our Traffic Safety Committee, which is an advisory committee to the board, helps us also prioritize that. The Community Road Fund, which is our local vehicle registration fee, which the board adopted in 2019, and as part of that adoption, the ordinance directed staff on how the money would be spent. Congestion relief projects, safety projects, paving of local roads, and then a strategic investment fund, which is money that goes towards projects of mutual concern between the county and cities, but also road transfers. And that's been very active. We created the Community Road Fund Advisory Committee, which again is an advisory committee to the board that helped us prioritize the congestion relief projects. The board adopted it. The Traffic Safety Commission helped us prioritize the safety projects. And the local road paving is a data-driven, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And then the Strategic Investment Fund projects are C4 made a recommendation, and the board adopted the C4 list. So that's what staff has been working under. The House Bill 2017, which was a major increase in gas tax and vehicle registration fees and weight mile taxes. It added a bike tax. It added a vehicle tax. It added a whole bunch of things that are stepping. They were stair-step, and I think the next gas tax increase is slated for this year or next, but it's little increments over time. I believe it maxes out in the next 2-3 years. At the time, the board approved the use of that money. Some of it's operations because expenses go up, but some of it goes to safety, but the bulk of it goes to paving our collectors and arterials. And we made a commitment to the board that when House Bill 2017 is fully implemented, we'll be using $8.5 million a year towards pavement surfacing, whether it be seals or paving or complete restoration. And so we're working towards that. The bike and ped, we have two separate plans that are incredibly old. A bike plan and a pedestrian plan. They're 20 years old, a little out of date. Next year, we're going to start what we're calling the Walk Bike Clackamas Plan, which will again eventually come to the board for adoption. We'll have a new master plan for bike and ped facilities for the county. And recall, we are required by law to spend 1% of our highway fund proceeds on bike ped. It's really not a problem because we do a lot, but that is a requirement. Next thing I have on here is something we're anticipating, and I know it's I-205 tolling. We don't have enough time to go into a 3-hour conversation on I-205 tolling. We could do 3 days on it. But we know there's a lot of unknowns, and even towards the end of this month into early September, we're having some technical staff meetings with ODOT staff. They're going to start actually first proposing some mitigation projects to us that we haven't seen. Our goal is still to hold ODOT accountable for the impacts of this project, but we're understanding this work might inform some policy decisions in the future. It's just a little nebulous still. So we're hoping, we have a feeling that soon we might have to talk to the board about policy decisions and whether I-205 tolling projects should change some of our priorities. But we're not quite there yet, but that's definitely on the near horizon. And the last piece is the Transit Development Plan, which the board adopted in 2021. It does not come with any funding associated with it, but it does help us in our regional discussions when it comes to the transit money allotments through the SIF and the STIF and a lot of other acronyms, so that we can have plans so that we're not starting from scratch. And it was the first time we ever did it, and it was a great exercise, and we're going to keep developing those planning capabilities with transit. We do have 7 transit providers in Clackamas County, which is a lot. The last piece, which I mentioned, was the paving, and it's not really policy because we use a data-driven approach to what we pave. It's other than the policies, the $8.5 million and the $1 million specifically for local roads from the Community Road Fund that I mentioned. We do have what we call a network level 5-year maintenance and rehabilitation plan. This is not like something that you should take and say, oh great, in 2024 you're going to chip seal this road. It's more of a guide for us, and it's a living document, but it shows we put a lot of effort into doing a data-driven approach to make sure we're getting bang for our buck. Our strategic goal is to have a PCI, pavement condition index, in this county of 70 or above, which industry standard, that's good. And we're right there, and so we're looking to maintain it. So we assess the system and figure out what we need to do to keep that rating up at a 70. The transit discussion, I know there has been some questions the board has asked. It is kind of odd because H3S owns part of it and DTD does part of it. And frankly, right now, that's working pretty well for us. We work very closely together. They definitely manage the elderly and disabled services, and they also operate the Mount Hood Express, which admittedly we have no experience operating a transit operation. They do it well. We have lots of meetings with them. DTD, when it comes to transit planning, that's when we get involved, and we actually work very closely with that team. Without a separate funding source for it, it's kind of hard to a different model would be difficult. But I know the question has come up, and right now, that's the model we're operating under.
So two quick things in closing. I mean, one of which I want to emphasize the fact that $8.5 million is an annual average paving package. Some years we do much more, some years we do a little bit less, okay? That's a fluctuation of work. Secondly, we also have, which not included in here, is kind of a consolidated look ahead where we combine an analysis of our maintenance capital to ensure we're leveraging those dollars appropriately, that we are leveraging them to the greatest extent feasible. And then last but not least, is we feel like we should mention it again. We have a new transportation maintenance facility that's under construction. I want to make sure the board is very clear that construction goes forward. I also want to make sure the board is very clear that we were very proactive in bonding at a very strategic, good time. We had estimated about $1.75 million for annual debt service. We had a great bond rate, came down to about 1.2. Basically, we're not going to direct any of our local funds there. It'll come to state highway funds. And that debt service payment equates to approximately 3% of the total amount of money we're getting from the state highway fund. So it's a pretty minimal amount. So, and with that, we're able to relocate our facilities out of the floodplain, make sure that we're able to respond to emergencies rather than responding to our own emergencies. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions the board might have, providing additional clarification at this point in time.
Thank you for this presentation. It's very good. The reason I called this session today was to discuss two issues that are very important. I believe it's necessary at this point to identify diversion routes that would result because of tolling. I think it's important that Clackamas County be proactive on that. I would like to see a list, offer it to ODOT, and those saying this is how it's going to affect our area. And I believe Clackamas County needs to be proactive on identifying diversion routes, what it's going to do to our country roads. Anything south of Oregon City is going to be tremendous, just in the unincorporated areas. And secondly, the vehicle registration fee, I think that needs to be reevaluated. I think this board needs to put parameters, general parameters, and we may need to use some of the vehicle registration fee to address the diversion issue. And I would like staff to come forward with identified diversion routes and a discussion on the vehicle registration fee, that we could give broad parameters to the group that has been set up to do this. And I do think it's time to reevaluate what we're spending our county road funds on because of outside forces beyond our control. Mr. Besner.
Yes, thank you for that. That all sounds great. I just want to make sure one thing I didn't mention is we have been proactive. We've gotten the raw modeling data from ODOT and had our own transportation planning staff analyze it on our own so that we feel comfortable and we're not just being told what the impacts will be. And we have that, and it's still a little iterative, but it's really close. And I think once those meetings happen at the end of this month, we're going to be able to dial in very, very quickly. on what we think the true impacts are going to be from diversion. And the other one one thing I do want to make sure with the vehicle registration fee, we have invested quite a bit on the congestion relief projects and the design of them, and the construction of them will be coming up within the next couple years. And so I just want to be aware of that we've already invested a lot of it in projects. So.
Yeah, but I think the unanticipated volume of what could happen is going to be very real. We've got roads out there with that are not sustainable for the amount of traffic. You've got potholes. There's been stop signs installed now that it's a four-way, which is very good safety. Used to be only one cross-section was a stop and the other one sailed through, and that was problematic. You know what those are. But I think we really need to do an analysis on this because in anticipation of what people's behavior is going to be on our roads, and that's going to be very, very important because, as you know, we are an export county as far as jobs are concerned, especially in our rural areas of Sandy, Estacada, Molalla, Colton, Canby, Malino, all of those huge areas in between. They get in their cars and they head north for their employment. And those are the areas in particular I'm talking about. Well, and then in addition to, when somebody exits off the freeway, you know, they head to Gladstone or Westland, that's not our issue. Our issue are county roads, and I know that. So I really want to see some heavy lifting done on this, and you let me know when you think you can bring back this discussion.
Perfect.
Dan?
And I just to expand on that, I think that, you know, in fact, I don't even think the parameters of the policy guidance regarding, you know, the community road fund really needs to be adjusted that much, because if you think about what are the products of diversion, they're congestion and safety related. And so that provides flexibility in there. It's more of a discussion around figuring out what this future state is and what those projects might be to mitigate, assist in mitigating some of that. And then secondly, it's important to note that through that project, we already have some projects that are identified on some of those roads that we're concerned about congestion, Stafford and other areas. So we're almost ahead of the curve to some extent because there are existing problems. There are existing problems that we've heard from the community in regards to the issue that you raised about geographically dispersing those monies on county roads. That is an emphasis that we take in front of our advisory board to make sure those dollars are not solely focused on certain areas of the county, that they are geographically dispersed and benefit the totality of the county as a whole. So I think that we'll be able to bring something forward once we have a better handle on all that, and we'll have a discussion regarding it.
Yes, I look forward to this discussion. We have a couple commissioners in the queue. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, I got a couple things. The easy one I'll ask first. Mike, our PCI index, is that what we call it, right? Is it PCQ or PCI?
PCI.
PCI. We moved the needle on that, didn't we? Like 1%?
Actually, in the past year, it went up 1.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, it's great. I mean, yeah.
So PCI index means?
It's the pavement condition index.
Okay, great.
It's a visual evaluation of what the pavement looks like.
And that sounds minimal, but with 1,400 linear miles of roadway and assets depreciate, they deteriorate. So we've had a discussion around standing. If we're static at 70, we're great.
So kudos, thank you, great job. That's great to hear, that's great news. I'm sure we have a ways to go yet before, you know, we get where we want to go, but I think it's important to point that out, so I just want to give you a shout out for that. So colleagues, you know, everything that Mike and Dan talked about, I'm going to, when they talk about congestion relief projects that are embedded part of this, you know, C4 vehicle registration fee, plus all the other projects are congestion relief, plus the congestion relief projects that are being spawned or stirred up or aggravated by the tolling proposals, it's a huge deal. And the language that was in that, I'm going to back up a little bit. We have ODOT that's crafting policy for tolling. Now we have Metro that is engaging in the RTP that's crafting language for
Go ahead, Paul.
Yep, crafting language for tolling. As I read the materials and what Metro's trying to do, and maybe I read it wrong, but I saw something that said before, proposed language, that before any capacity improvements are made, one must congestion price the road before those investments or that change is made. Now think about that. So if Highway 212 between 242nd and Sunnyside, let's just say, is a congestion, there's a lot of congestion there right now. Don't know if it's it's not part of diversion, or let's say it's Stafford Road. We need a congestion. So it's almost like, when did we talk about tolling our local roads? Now that's not ODOT doing that, that's Metro. I'm trying to flag for you all,
They want to toll local roads?
they want to tow the local roads.
Heard
You
that.
gotta be kidding me.
And they're crafting policy that would almost force us to do that if we wanted to increase capacity on some of these roads that are undersized in our area. That's how I read the language. Okay?
Can they
Mike?
comment?
Yeah,
Can they
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's really interesting. I heard, to piggyback on you, I heard the city of Wilsonville was considering tolling their city roads. Yeah, is that true also?
I haven't heard that.
I'm not familiar with what Wilsonville may or may not do, and with Metro, they have draft language out that says, it mimics an early draft that was in the legislative House Bill 3055, which says before you add capacity or new lanes, you have to consider other things like congestion price, see if it'll work.
Yes.
So I haven't exactly said toll local roads, but you could certainly infer that that would be a conversation.
Which has been an issue that we have raised in discussions with you directly and others, and it's a regional concern as well.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about the proliferation of tolling and congestion pricing when it's not even proven to achieve. This is the whole thing I think is very problematic for them, more so than for all of us. And that is they state continuously, and it's in writing, that the goal of congestion pricing is to change behavior, increase mobility, and reduce CO2 output or climate change aspects. Okay, what's being proposed here doesn't accomplish any of those. Actually makes some of them worse. So I have a little bit of problem if that language gets expanded into local roads and we can't actually address that or even use the funds that would be mitigation funds if capacity. Anyhow, there's a lot of moving pieces in this. I just have one question for you all related to this and related to everything else. If we craft our own TSP, and our TSP, which we do, and our TSPs are folded into the RTP, and our policies don't mesh, or acting on our TSP doesn't mesh with Metro policies, how we reconcile that?
Well, it's a good question. And I could tell you right now, we're very aware of it, and we are submitting and will be submitting lots of comments to make sure that our local control of how we want our local system to be is not taken away. So I'd have to talk to our planners who know the transportation planning rule a lot better than I do, but our strategy right now is let's not get there.
By removing the obstacles that are there.
By making sure that when language is proposed that doesn't work for us, that we have them change it.
I believe the TSP requires an acknowledgement, and that's where that tension point would come forward if you had conflicting language. So, and I also want to emphasize something to the rest of the board that we've had discussions around. Our systems are different. Multnomah County, Washington County, they have maturer systems than we do. And so when you start talking about the necessity to improve our system, it's to create systems that are comparable in nature to the systems they have. So you talk about Multnomah County, Portland, they have redundant routes, parallel routes, grid systems. We've got a lot of topography that create issues with that. We don't have that system yet, so we're still maturing our system. So just throwing that in because we've had discussions about that as well.
Yeah, just a few things. I just want to flag that, but that's more conversation for another day. Thank you. That's all I have for today.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Shull, you're up.
Yes, Mike and Dan. Chair Smith mentioned the potential to use the BRF fund to pay for the cost of diversion. In the past, has this county coordinated with ODOT on this issue, on the who's going to pay for the cost in Clackamas County caused by diversion and the potential need for lanes, roads, all kinds of improvements to our roads along 205?
Yes, repeatedly and constantly. And
Okay.
those meetings that I mentioned at the end of the month are like really the biggest and best opportunity for us to keep advancing that. And as I mentioned before, our intent is for them to make us whole, that we're not paying for any of it. And so the complication becomes they're working under this federal NEPA process, and NEPA is very prescriptive, and NEPA will say, oh, well, you know, the rules say we have to do this and this and this, and we've already told them that's not good enough. You have to go above and beyond what NEPA says. But yeah, we are constantly pushing to try, and they haven't said they're not going to, but we don't have anything.
But they also haven't said they are going to.
We don't have anything, well, they keep making vague promises, but we don't have anything specific yet.
Everything about tolling is vague so far.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to expand on that in just 1 second.
Yes,
That's diversion around this specific project.
right.
We have diversion now. I mean, own the fact that you've all been through it. I-5 gets clogged, I-5 gets clogged. Where is that little app in your hand and the impacts of that app in your hand on your phone? Where's it going to push you to? It pushes you to Stafford. It pushes you to all these different areas. And those are basically some of the key areas that we have actually queued up projects right now on our county system to assist with mitigating some of that. So it's just important to understand the process that Mike's referring to is accurate in its totality, but that's around the direct impacts of tolling of the I-205 corridor.
Got it, okay. And then also, of the 1,400 miles of road in Clackamas County, does that include like 211, 212, 213? No, it does not.
Just county roads.
Okay, so in the transportation system plan update, what coordination is done with ODOT to bring a focus on those roads?
Yeah, we coordinate with ODOT. We also coordinate with our cities, because if it's a road in a city, we don't plan it either. They do. And so, but we work with both of them. And the last one, I don't have it in front of me, but the last one, we had a section on, hey, here's some state highway projects that aren't ours, but we're noting how important they are.
And the coordination is key, especially when we talk about the cities as well, because it's a system. And so while we don't tell the cities what to do with their system, the nuance is having them understand what our system is and how those systems connect to provide a thorough transportation system for the citizens of Clackamas County.
Yeah, good, okay. Mike, Dan's winning the beard contest so far, so get to work on that, will you?
I could beat him easily if I tried.
Did you see how amazingly dressed Mike is today?
Yeah, I
Thank you, gentlemen. I have some concluding comments, but Commissioner Fisher, you are in the queue.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Oh my gosh, you guys are so funny. So thank you for this. I love it. I would love to know, and I don't have to know right now, but just for my own systems analysis with regards to all of the different funds, what percentage of the funds and what restrictions there are.
Okay.
So I can get that later.
Okay.
But I like seeing the big picture. The piece that you actually kind of answered, Dan, that I didn't ask my question yet, but you kind of answered it just about the money through the Community Road Fund. There's the advisory committee. There are all those lists of projects and prioritize is what we're going to do first. We haven't seen that for a while. It might be a good idea for us just to have that because, and then also, I mean, I know that the work on Stafford, it's dealing with the diversion now, will definitely affect the diversion in the future. Just put a little check mark as to which ones are, because it's congestion. It's for safety and congestion, and that diversion is happening now. So having that information as background as we move forward would be.
We can provide all that information to you and the rest of the board. That's not a problem.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Thank you. Just in closing, you mentioned 180 bridges in Clackamas County, and you've been doing very good work on replacing and repairing those bridges as we see the asks come in here, but also identifying bridges that could receive more traffic because of diversion. I mean, if the bridge goes out, the road's done. And I'm not saying any of our bridges are on verge of collapse.
They have not.
Yes, thank you. But any other additional work on bridges to make sure that arterial is functioning as well. So in conclusion, update our diversion plan in an equitable, balanced fashion. We always hear about Stafford. We always hear about Stafford. But Stafford's going to get clogged, and they're going to go elsewhere. So we need to be prepared for that. And then reviewing the vehicle registration fee, and I want to know what's done in the past and to the future. I do think that this board needs to put their imprint on that going forward, and we have not had an opportunity to do that.
And there's a time and a place for that, and we stand ready to have that discussion with the board. Again, we're just kind of waiting to figure out what those exact impacts are going to be, and we'll bring that back for consideration.
And I'll be talking to you both privately along with Gary Schmidt for an update on how you folks are doing on that.
Perfect.
Thank you. This is a very good discussion. Any other concluding remarks from commissioners? Sonia?
Yeah, Chair Smith, I appreciated your comment about in regards to diversion, and we always hear about Stafford, but I'm just thinking, you know, where else is there to go? There's Willamette Drive at some points, but we don't have that grid system that other areas of this region have, so it's tough as to where else will they go. I mean,
65th comes to mind.
okay,
There's others out there that are going to be impacted.
yeah.
I'm not
That's-
sure if the 65th is even a county road. I don't think so.
Oh, it straddles the line and goes back and forth. But, yeah, there's a lot. There's Eck and Borland and 99E and Canby and everything. You're right, everything in between.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Having that picture it would be good to know as well. Thank you.
Great.
Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the issue of transit. Again, I know Paul, that's been his piece. We are still woefully behind of really moving people to work and back because of lack of a coherent transit system. But we have 7 transit agencies, don't we?
Yeah,
in this
we have
county?
7 operating in Clackamas County.
Okay, and how is that working with TriMet?
That's
Or not?
probably a separate session.
Okay, yeah. That'd be something I'd be interested in.
Yeah, that's a longer discussion, I think. But
Okay.
there is coordination going on.
Okay, but still not enough.
So what I've requested is our roads going on for the next discussion, not necessarily TriMet.
No. I agree with you. I just would raise that up as something in the near future, something I'd like to look at.
Well, it's always
least,
been an
maybe
issue.
do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we need to be pushing more because it affects our economic development presence here in the county if people can get back and forth to work.
Feel free to look back at every JPAC meeting that Paul's been at, Commissioner Savas has been at, where he's been raising the issue of insufficient services.
Transit.
And we continue to bang that drum.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, if I may, just real quick,
Yep.
and that is that, we are seeing it on the land use side, that where, transit is supposed to be built into our codes and plans, and it's supposed to be into our mobility aspects and requirements that are coming. It's supposed to be built into diversion mitigation, all these things, but yet there's no funds and there's no means to provide the transit to do all that work. So they can't make a requirement and not fund us. Not only is it an unfunded mandate, it's beyond that. This is an unfunded blockade that will stop us from building what we need to build. And that's the part that really bothers me.
Yep, I agree. Thank you very much,
Thank you so
gentlemen, for
much.
coming forward. Good discussion. Gary, what's up next?
Next is expanded recycling services, presented by our Transportation and Development, Sustainability, and Solid Waste team. Presenters are Cheryl Bell, Assistant Director of Transportation and Development, and Evan Polk, Sustainability and Solid Waste Manager. Go ahead.
Please introduce yourselves.
Well, good morning, Chair Smith and Commissioners. Cheryl Bell, Assistant Director of Development for the Department of Transportation and Development.
Yes, also good morning to you all. I'm Evan Polk, the manager for the Sustainability and Solid Waste Program in DTD.
So we are here today to seek direction from the board regarding whether to allow expanded recycling in Clackamas County. So expanded recycling is the collection for a fee of certain recyclable solid waste materials that are not currently collected curbside. So the county's received interest in providing enhanced recycling programs from 2 entities, one from the private company Ridwell and one from our current franchise haulers. But it's important to note that the action on allowing expanded recycling is not specific to these proposals, but a larger discussion of how the board would like to regulate this type of solid waste collection. So there are many reasons to offer expanded recycling beyond what is currently collected in your curbside. It's environmentally beneficial to recycle some additional materials for proposed collection. There are some community members who are willing to pay for the convenience of expanded curbside recycling. Providing additional subscription services brings more recycling opportunities to our community that do not impact the current curbside recycling. And with the service being optional, it allows customers to subscribe only if the service fits their needs and their budget. Optional services could also create conditions to make it financially feasible for additional materials to eventually transition into regular curbside recycling. And lastly, the materials considered for proposed enhanced recycling services represent less than 2% of the solid waste stream. So removing some of this volume of material from franchise collection would not undermine the existing system, as long as the county sets clear and strong limits on materials and the county maintains authority to oversee any new services. So as I noted when I started, this has come to the forefront because we have two proposals in front of you, one from Ridwell and then one from the current franchise haulers. And they're proposing to provide this type of subscription-based collection of certain recycled materials for a fee. And the option for companies like Ridwell or any other private company to provide this service is currently not allowed in county code. So in order to offer any kind of expanded recycling in Clackamas County, code changes are needed. The staff have identified two policy options for consideration and provided expanded recycling services in Clackamas County. So in considering these options, it's important to note in Oregon, local government's authority to regulate solid waste collection is a well-established right in state law and in court. The public benefit of regulating garbage and recycling services allowed outside the franchise system is also part of our regional waste plan. So a primary objective of any process we pursue is that it affirms the authority to regulate the collection of solid waste, both garbage and recycling, for public benefit. So that brings us to the options we have for you today. The first one we're calling our license option. For this option, the county would amend its code to allow both franchise and non-franchise businesses to offer limited solid waste collection services for the purpose of recycling for compensation. So this is considered the license option because the ability to collect these would be granted by the county under a license or a permit under our code and administrative rule. This option would allow multiple participants to do business in this way, including Ridwell, any other private companies, and our current franchise haulers. In this scenario, staff would also recommend some design principles or really kind of some sideboards on the program to ensure the county maintains the value of our system. So for example, putting limits on what is collected under expanded recycling, and attachment 2 has some of these draft ideas if we pursue this policy option. In this option, the franchisees may choose to offer expanded recycling services under a license. And then option 2, we're calling our franchise option. For this option, the county would amend its existing administrative rule to expand recycling on the part of our franchise collectors. This option would create a program in which franchise collectors accept source-separated solid waste material for collection and recycling for an additional fee as a subscription basis for the customer. So under this option, it would be required for the franchisees to provide the service, but it would be optional on the part of the customer. It would be a subscription service that they could choose. If chosen, this option would be a recommendation that the county limit the ability to offer expanded recycling services exclusively to franchisees or their subcontractors, in which case other companies would be unable to collect such material for a fee without violating our code. Prior to bringing this issue to you, it was referred to the Solid Waste Commission as they are the county's formal advisory body reflecting public participation in managing the solid waste system. And the Solid Waste Commission met twice on this option of expanded recycling. On February 16th, a Ridwell representative gave a presentation and answered the Commission's questions regarding the company and their services. And on March 10th, the Commission met to hear the presentation on the franchisee's proposal to provide expanded recycling. And at that March 10th meeting, staff provided the options that are being presented to you here today. Solid Waste Commission voted 4-2 with 1 abstaining to recommend the franchise option, which is your option 2 today, allowing only the county's garbage and recycling franchisees to provide expanded recycling. So to bring expanded recycling to Clackamas County, Board are seeking direction from you. There are 3 options for your consideration as presented in your packet. So option 1, which we just described as a license option, which is to direct staff to develop code amendments to allow business to receive a license or permit to provide limited expanded recycling services for compensation in unincorporated Clackamas County. We have option 2, which was described as your franchise option, and this is the Solid Waste Commission's recommended option, which is direct staff to develop administrative rule amendments, directing the franchise collectors to offer subscription-based expanded recycling to customers for an additional fee, subject to fee and regulatory rules and code administrative rule. And then option 3 is kind of your status quo option, and it would maintain our current code and not authorize any additional curbside collection, expanded recycling of any material for compensation in unincorporated Clackamas County. And I do want to call your attention, on August 1st, Ridwell did send the BCC an email directly. It was received after the packet was put together, so it's not in your packet. I do have some copies if you'd like a copy of that additional email.
Yes, Cheryl, go ahead and present that to the board.
And with that, that's the end of our presentation. So I have Evan and
Evan,
Winterhalter
as
here, so
thank
we can
you.
answer all your
As
questions.
Cheryl's passing that out, do you wish to make any comments?
No, I'm just here to support you and answer some questions if I can.
Thank you. Commissioner Scholl?
Yes, good morning, Cheryl and Eben. Could you clarify something for me? In option 1, does that mean if that was selected by the board that you could have franchised and non-franchised companies? In other words, for option 1, Ridwell would be able to provide the service that so many people have reported they really like without being franchised. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And can you explain to me what, if any, problems would arise from a business, a non-franchised business, picking up this recycling as opposed to if it was required to be a franchise business?
Would that be under option 2 if we limit it to just franchises?
Well, I'm not really sure.
Sure.
So Commissioner Schell, your question is what concerns would there be if
Yep.
a private company
So if
offered the service?
if Ridwell is allowed to collect this material in unincorporated Clackamas County
Right.
as a non-franchised entity,
Mhm.
what problems or benefits come from that?
Well, we provided our Solid Waste Commission some analysis of this, and we started really by talking about the values of the system that we have today, the public value that's created in the system today. And we identified a number of those, and those are in your staff report. And so a major and primary concern would be that if there are new sort of entrants into the collection of solid waste, that we be able to protect those values that we have built over time. One of those values is that our community and Oregonians generally value and support recycling. And that's really thanks to the system that we have had in place for 25 plus years. So a company like Ridwell or similar one is really able to be successful in a place like Oregon, in part because of the system we already have, right? And so we do not, it's important to maintain our authority and ability to regulate and oversee the collection of solid waste, which this material is, so that the overseen franchise system isn't disrupted. Now, we felt, staff felt that, as we articulated to the Solid Waste Commission, that with the appropriate sideboards, any of those risks could be mitigated.
One more question, and then with option 2, is it not correct that option 2 would require Waste Management to collect the same material that Ridwell is currently collecting? And if that's the case, does Waste Management, are they receptive to the requirement for adding capacity, trucks, vehicles, workers to their current contract
Right.
to do this?
The answer to that generally is yes. So we have several franchise providers in our community. Waste Management is one of 8. And all of them, through the association they maintain, the Clackamas County Refuse and Recycling Association, have proposed to offer this service. And that would mean that they would take on the provision of additional containers to collect these materials, and the operational responsibilities of collecting those on a periodic basis. There would be a number of program design decisions that would still need to be made if that was the decision that the board chose, and we would be back to the board at a later date, presumably with some of those program design concepts.
And one last question, please. I understand that Ridwell, the material that they collect, goes to processing places that are different from what our current franchisees deliver or take that material to. Is that correct?
I believe there are some differences because most of the materials that they are collecting for recycling aren't currently collected for recycling by our franchisees. And so the destinations they've found to accept those materials in general are different, or additional, I should say.
And finally, if Ridwell was allowed to operate in unincorporated Clackamas County, would there be any harm that would come to our current franchisees?
Well, the material that is represented by this, I think, as part of your presentation,
it's less than 2% of the current stream.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't believe that it would impact what they're currently hauling.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, fascinating discussion. I did have a lot of inquiries when I was at the Trolley Trail Festival about this, and I believe there was a booth nearby that people visited first and then saw me afterwards and expressed theirs. And what I think the theme out of there, which I agree with, is really, in my own words, really the stewardship of the waste stream, so to speak, whether it's recycled or it's not recycled. And the concerns I heard was, and I specifically remember one couple telling me that it was not just about picking it up and the convenience. It was about making sure it went to the right place, right? It was cradle to grave, right? It went to the right place. So I just look at this as more of a stewardship aspect. I mean, not solely, but we got to take that into account here. That's our job and our responsibility. So I think the franchise model, if you just put all these businesses and so forth aside for a moment, the part about the franchise model that I understand, for example, let's just say it's clamshells. Let's use clamshells as an example. So if without the franchise model, areas that are easy to serve might be offered, with there's option 1 or 2, means of which to dispose of their clamshells. And areas that are not served by either of the two, or let's just say, well, I'm going to clarify that. If it's not franchised for this extra material, then people in the outskirts that's not easy to serve would be disposing of their stuff either in the landfill or their current stuff or in the river or in their backyard or burning it or whatnot. So we need something that is countywide, I believe, that's our job here, that addresses the stewardship, from cradle to grave, that's disposed of the most efficient, responsible way possible. So I'm going to be looking at that as a lens to somehow assure that. Now, whether it's a private company, option 1, or whether it is another aspect, whether it is option 2, where it's the current haulers, what assurances will be made that, again, stewardship, cradle to grave, that they are being, those products, clamshells, for example, or whatever it may be, batteries, there's lots of stuff out there, that they're actually going to be not end up in the landfill and be disposed of in the most responsible way possible. Are we going to be doing something different here as we expand this recycling thing to monitor that?
You want to take a stab at that?
I'll start, but then I may defer to my expert. I think it's a good question, Commissioner, and obviously our goal is recycling and improving the environmental collection of these services. I think having a license or the franchise, when if we do the license option, having those sideboards and being able to have that conversation about the material collected, part of that is making sure that the end point, that there is that the material collected is going to a market and being used into the collection that's not being dumped. So getting the county involved and having that regulation makes that difference. So I think that's where we can guarantee, or not guarantee, but we can impact where that material goes. Is that?
I think that's right. Stewardship is something that we is a value we hold in our system today, and it's a lens we could use in the design of either one of these options.
That's why we're recommending those guidelines or sideboards if we choose the licensing option, that we can put that in there to make sure we can follow that stewardship piece.
Yeah, I say that because it seems to be, when I read the correspondence that we've gotten through our email chains, for example, it seems to be focused on convenience or a particular company, not about the stewardship so much. And I granted, I'm not saying that people aren't thinking that, but it's not really clear that maybe that ought to be the shining star, the star in which we're all trying to strive for. So I want to make sure that that's done in the most responsible way. So my decision on which to do is me really going to base on that stewardship. Again, cradle to grave, that we're taking the precautions or the regulate, whatever it is, to assure that takes place. That's what I have for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas, Commissioner Fisher, and then Commissioner Schrader.
Thank you, Chair Smith. I want to get this in my head. So we have the option of having this extra recycling going through a franchise, or we could set up a new program, which would be a license or a permit or some sort of regulation. Tell me what the difference would be between those two programs.
Between a license and operating it exclusively under the franchise?
Yeah.
One of the key differences is our ability to oversee the cost. We don't expect that a license or a permit system would set the cost that customers pay.
Okay, so we wouldn't regulate cost. What else would be different?
It depends on the sort of regulatory sideboards that you might choose to put in place if you were to go with a license option. For example, we could, in both scenarios, require a certain amount of data reporting from the participants that could speak to the stewardship issue that Commissioner Savas raised. In general, a system operating under the franchise is something that's almost a partnership between the county and the service provider. So we have more discretion over the operations. We have a system where, by and large, the jobs are, union represented. So we might not have any control over kind of the work experience that might be in place under a license. A company like Ridwell is kind of operate like with an app and have employees and or contractors who provide that service. I guess similar to maybe Uber or some of the other services that have sprung up in the last decade or so.
Okay, this is great, thank you. So, and it also in my mind, so tell me if I'm making a correct or incorrect assumption. If we went with a franchise system, we have that system set up, we have those, that criteria of what it takes to be part of the franchise. We may look at expanding it, broadening it, but it would be the same playing field for everyone that's in this business if we went with franchise. But if we went with having the franchise system, because that's in place, but we also went through a licensing or permitting process, that would be a whole other program that seems to me might be an additional administrative burden. Is that a correct assumption or not?
It is. It would be an additional administrative piece on our side. We think the setup we can address in our current structure, but we would probably be looking at maybe some additional costs and recapturing those costs, not on the customer side, but on the licensing side. So licensing fee or something like that to take up those costs, because it would be a new program.
Okay, and then another question I have is, so say we go with the franchise option, what would it take for, I'm guessing like Got Junk is someone that's not part of our franchise system.
Right.
Or I'm thinking of these extra.
Sure.
What would it take for them to become part of our franchise system? What would that look like? So if Ridwell joined in and played by the same rules as the rest of our providers?
They'd have to be a full franchise.
Yeah, their business model is a very sort of, it cuts across multiple communities, but it's very different than collection of garbage and recycling that we have today. And so we would not franchise with a specific company in mind. We would franchise with a with a service in mind, with the creation of value in the community, right? And so we would, if it seemed like the existing franchise system wasn't an appropriate tool to offer this service, we could explore other ways of franchising that service. For example, one option that wasn't outlined in your staff report because we felt it was very complicated would be to create a across the county separate franchise, right? And then we would go out and see if there was a company that wanted to operate under as a franchisee, providing enhanced recycling services across the county, separate from, like an overlay to the existing franchise. And in our conversations with Ridwell, you know, they've indicated zero interest in that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, the other piece I'm interested in, and I appreciate the staff report, but I'm not getting a clear picture of the other jurisdictions. I mean, it looks like Washington County might be in some litigation. That's in here, but it doesn't say what the word ends with, is in federal court seeking, and then it looks like that part of the second page of attachment, or the third page of attachment 1.
Okay.
Is not there. So I'm interested in what litigation is out there. It looks like Lake Oswego saying, nope, got to play within our franchise. I mean, there's different, sort of a mishmash. I would love to see a map, is where it's allowed, where it's not allowed. What are the risks of not proceeding? Does this subject us to litigation with Ridwell? All of those kinds of questions. What's happening in Washington County?
I think there's quite the narrative. Excuse me, there's quite the narrative in our packet of what the other counties are doing. And I'm going to reference that in a minute. Any other questions, Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, it doesn't say what's happening with the litigation in our packet.
Let's see.
Any other questions, Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question before we make a decision. I don't have to have it right now, but I would like to understand what the risks are as far as litigation goes for both sides.
I say we probably want to ask county council for the risks on litigation. We know Washington County, there is a lawsuit with Washington County and Ridwell, but beyond that, I think it would be a county council question.
Rick Winterholler, are you wanting to come forward? Please let Rick sit down.
You may have some good information about the lawsuits.
Rick Winterhalter with Sustainability and Solid Waste, and to that point, they were just, they've had 2 court cases in Washington County at the circuit court. Both have been, well, yesterday's was in favor of Washington County. So both of those have gone in favor of Washington County, and Washington County does have an expanded recycling program through the franchisees.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yes, good question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schrader, and then I will speak to this.
Yeah, I just want to ask a clarifying question. So we're only talking about the franchises in the unincorporated areas. Some of those franchises also operate under the umbrella of city auspice. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
So we don't know if the franchises, if that will change then under the umbrella of the cities. In other words, like I live in Lake Oswego, would I have an opportunity, would the franchise just expand to include cities? I mean, I'm wondering about that. In other words, if they're going to expand across the county with this new service, are they going to limit it just to the unincorporated areas? And that's probably a question for them, but I was just wondering.
You're right, it would be a question for them. We would certainly work with our counterparts at cities to share our work, whatever pathway was chosen.
Okay, that's all I wanted to.
Okay, good. Commissioners, the information in our packet is very, very good and concise. You know, it talks about what the other jurisdictions are doing. Mr. Winterhalter just told us a lawsuit in Washington County actually supports the existing of the franchise system with an opportunity for others to come in underneath, which is similar to option 2 in our packet, which I'm going to support today. I also want to refer you to a letter in the packet under attachment 2, the headline Clackamas County Refuse and Recycling Association, signed by all of the businesses in Clackamas County who provide the service: Aero Sanitary Service, B&B Leasing, Bliss Sanitary, Clackamas Garbage Company, Dan Walker Disposal, Hoodview Disposal and Recycling, WC, Republic Services, Sunset Garbage Collection, Waste Management of Oregon. And the reason why I read that list is because these companies, for the beginning of garbage collection, have been under the government control of regulation, and they have been tried and true. They have obeyed all the rules. And these are private generational businesses in Clackamas County who have stayed with us through thick and thin, who have abided by the rules, who have said yes, who have said, that's making me shriek because I have more regulation, and of which we need to control as a board. I believe we need to support the businesses that are currently doing all of these asks that come their way from either Metro or any special interest. And that's why I'm supporting number 2, because it will allow for a certain amount of recycling within the current franchise systems. And I have always been very consistent on this issue. If somebody else wants to come in our county and do business, you will follow the same rules that everybody else has been doing for decades, if not generations. I am not the least bit interested in allowing a whole new licensor to come in and try to undermine our existing tried and true and undermining our current businesses who have made millions and millions of investment over time to provide a service that our constituents and our residents demand. And so let me be very clear on that. I understand the Ridwell letter that has come in. I understand a lot what's going on. But I think option number 2, based on all the information that's been out there in lawsuits, keeps us in a very good place. If Ridwell or anybody else wants to come in underneath the franchise system, they can offer the service. But I'm not the least bit interested in seeing our current franchise system undermined by somebody or any company who does not want to play by the rules, and that's my bottom line. Commissioner Savas.
Yep, thank you. So, yeah, on page 13 and 14 of our packet, Commissioner Fisher, you'll find what other jurisdictions are doing. It's listed there. I agree with a lot of what was just said. And Eben, thanks for sharing that there was not interest in maybe another level of franchising which dealt with the recyclables only. If there's no interest in that, there's no sense in us pursuing staff time to pursue that option. Again, I go back to stewardship. It's not in our best interest as a county and as responsible citizens to just consider recycling within an urban convenient area to serve and let the other areas dispense with their stuff in a perhaps more reckless way or not have a choice or a convenient way to do that. So I move that we pursue option 2, direct staff to develop administrative rule amendments directing franchised collectors to offer subscription-based expanded recycling to customers for an additional fee subject to fee and regulatory rules in code and administrative rule. That's my motion.
Second.
Commissioner Savas has made a motion to support option 2. Commissioner Schrader has seconded that motion. Any further discussion?
Yes, Chair. I just want to say that
Yes.
having made the motion, I just want to renew my concern that make sure whatever we craft and bring back has those elements to make sure that things are properly disposed of in a responsible way.
And I support that as well. I think that's very important. And this has been a very good discussion looking at some of these options and services available. Any other comments? Seeing none, Tony, please take the poll.
Commissioner Fisher.
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl.
No.
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 4-1. Thank you very much.
Commissioners, thank you,
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
You bet. Gary, what's up next?
The next policy session is short-term rental registration. We have staff from County Administration, Transportation and Development, Tourism and Cultural Affairs, and the Finance Department, all to present. But kicking it off will be our policy advisors from County Administration, Christina Fadenrecht and Everett Wild. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. Am I on?
Yes.
This is a follow-up from your first hearing on June 23rd to repeal Chapter 8.10 from County Code, which is short-term rental administration. We have a second hearing on that repeal scheduled for September 8th. But at the first hearing, the board directed staff to take a look at an alternative proposal that was presented at that first hearing. And also want to note that the implementation of the short-term rental program, which is currently on the books, has been delayed until July 1st, 2023. So we're in this window where the program is not in place, and we have that second hearing coming. So staff from County Administration, Department of Transportation and Development, Finance, Council, and Tourism all did an analysis of this alternative proposal, which you'll see in the executive summary of your packet, and are here to answer some questions after we do our presentation. So we have with us Dan Johnson, Director of Transportation and Development, Elizabeth Comfort, Director of Finance, Jim Austin from Tourism, and Nate Boderman from County Council to answer any questions in a few moments. And I'll turn it over to Christina.
Thank you, Everett. Good morning, Chair Smith, Commissioners, Administrator Schmidt. My name is Christina Fadenrecht, Policy Advisor. I would like to summarize the alternative proposal before you. Essentially, this would remove the registration fee from the short-term rental program. It would add an acknowledgement certification affidavit form together with the registration form. The registration would be free, and the transient room tax would be maintained with this proposal. That affidavit acknowledgement form would include compliance to fire, life, safety, health, occupancy standards, parking, garbage removal, things like that. The registrations for hosts can be revoked or suspended with the 3-strike program to be further defined within a given time period. That could be 1 or 2 years that it may be revoked or suspended. Any complaints or problems or inconsistencies with the affidavit submitted that result in issued citations from violations within Chapter 8.10 or the short-term rental code could count as a strike. And finally, the proposal suggests a 1 or 2 year pilot program, with the conclusion of the program having an evaluation of further considerations to limit short-term rental numbers or location. And with that, I will turn it over to Everett to talk
So staff was directed to evaluate the feasibility of this alternative proposal, and we looked at several different points. Staff roles and responsibilities, kind of what it would take to administer such an alternative proposal. The definition of a strike in this 3 strikes model, what would count as a strike to move the needle on getting towards 3 strikes. What sort of community engagement has been done on short-term rentals to date and on this alternative proposal. The process and procedures for data management is another kind of administrative aspect. We're collecting information. If someone gets a strike, we have to have a database to collect that. We need to know who the short-term rental operators are so we can tie that together, track how many strikes a particular property has accumulated, and then check to make sure that if they do get 3 strikes, they're following our rules and not renting their property as a short-term rental. So that involves some data management and some administrative back end. So we looked at that and funding considerations as well, and what it would take to have the administrative processes in place to bring this proposal to fruition. And with that, Christina will wrap us up.
Okay, so the 2 options being presented to you are to accept and direct staff to move forward with the alternative proposal, or the second option, do not accept and continue to move forward with the repeal of the existing 8.10 code, and that hearing is September 8th again. And again, we have staff from the respective departments here with us to help answer questions you might have. Thank you. I'll open it up to you.
Thank you. We have another presentation. Thank you for coming forward. Nate Boderman, County Council, would you come forward, please?
Thanks.
Specifically, I requested for you to bring information regarding a lawsuit in natural resource zones and the new policy Airbnb nationally is adopted.
All right. So I did hear about the Airbnb policy, so I will do that, and then, of course, I can summarize the current status of the lawsuit. I guess first, I understand that there was a question about Airbnb's recent party policy that I understand was a temporary measure that was implemented during the height of COVID and was recently made permanent. What I understand that to be is really an internal policy to that specific platform prohibiting gatherings of 16 or more and also heightening consequences, if you will, for repeat offenders. I'll emphasize that this is a platform-specific only policy specific to Airbnb, and so for those that are advertising short-term rentals on other platforms like Vacasa or VRBO, it would have no effect. Similarly, it has no effect on any of our own regulations, and so it's truly something internal to Airbnb. All the consequences would be, again, specific to that platform.
Well, Nate, it has no consequence on our own regulations, but aren't they self-regulating by trying to implement a policy limiting parties because they know it's an issue? Not only is it Airbnb, it's VRBO as well.
Yeah, no, clearly they know that it's an issue. Some of the statistics that
And isn't self-monitoring the best way?
Well, you could argue that they've been self-monitoring nuisance impacts since the beginning of the platform, right?
But they have beefed it up, correct? Or not? I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, as it pertains to parties and large gatherings, they have adopted a specific policy.
That's exactly what is one of the issues.
Yes.
Is parties and large gatherings that's causing distress in some areas.
Yeah, and I'll add, it looks like they have, increased enforcement by way of making more resources available to neighbors in terms of neighborhood livability issues with hotlines. I don't know how that's translating, but, and whether it's well, they don't release statistics as far as I can tell about, enforcement, and so it remains to be seen what effect this is actually
The
happening.
enforcement not only needs to come from the company like Airbnb and VRBO, but the people who own the homes needs to be, and the people who are having parties may be restricted from ever coming back again in the area. I mean, those are some internal self-regulating measures that these companies can take, because I don't know how often, sincerely, or how many homes in the area have 12 or 14 bedrooms. I don't think it's probably a lot that have these parties, but I do understand it's an issue, so that might be one way to do it. Now, secondly, what about the lawsuit in natural resource areas?
Yeah, so as we've explained before, we had a challenge to our zoning ordinance amendments. And I want to emphasize that the zoning ordinance are separate apart from Chapter 8.10, which is specifically is the context of what's being considered here and what's being considered for repeal here in a few weeks. But the lawsuit in the natural resource zone specifically alleged, and the court upheld the notion that short-term rentals are not an allowed use on land zoned EFU, on land zoned timber and farm forest. And so what that requires us to do is go back and make an amendment to our zoning code. But again, that has nothing to do with the business regulations, has nothing to do with the enforcement of noise, parking, garbage. It has nothing to do with the enforcement of noise, parking, garbage, other nuisance impacts that really Chapter 8.10 was designed to address.
And what was that has not been settled yet?
No, Court of Appeals upheld LUBA's determination that short-term rentals are not an allowed use in those natural resource zones. So again,
And so how does that affect our code?
well, it affects our zoning ordinance in the sense that we'll have to bring back to you an amendment excluding short-term rentals from those resource zones. And again, we kept the business regulations, we kept the nuisance regulations separate and apart from those zoning, and so we can effectively run those amendments separately. But again, if what you are talking about here today is the enforcement elements, the nuisance elements, the, again, parking, garbage, noise, occupancy elements, that really has no bearing on what the Court of Appeals decided.
But the natural resource zones, are they identified by map?
Yes, yes.
And does the county give notice to these particular ones out there? And I don't know how many are out there, but it has been an issue that was brought to us by staff that this could affect this issue going forward. Is there a mechanism by which these rentals are eliminated?
Well,
What's the enforcement arm of this?
we haven't been enforcing.
What?
We have not been enforcing on short-term
Since the
rentals.
court case came down, what is the enforcement arm?
Well, it's not an allowed use in the
It's
resource
not
zones.
an allowed use, so
And
we have to wait for
according to
a
the-
code complaint?
Well, yes, correct. And according to the courts, it's never been an allowed use. And so it's not as if we had issued land use decisions previously authorizing property owners to do this use.
So if it's not allowed use, then the only enforcement arm that we have available to us is through our code compliance. Potentially, that could be more work put on that department to enforce a code from a lawsuit, correct?
Yes.
Potentially.
Potentially. I will say zoning violations are fairly easy to identify in the sense that if somebody is advertising a short-term rental, we can match that up pretty clearly to what zone they're in. If they're in the resource zones, that's a pretty easy violation to substantiate.
So somebody has a house in a natural resource zone, and let's say I go rent it for the weekend, okay? I'm in and out. I'm in and out before anybody even knows that they can find me, and so it goes to the property owner.
Yeah.
So that's the issue. You can't enforce a code violation if there's no evidence that it happened except for hearsay testimony. Oh, I saw somebody staying in the house that it wasn't the owner. Well, how do you know it wasn't the owner? That's my issue on this whole thing. How do you enforce this stuff? From whatever's presented here, a hybrid enforcement is extremely, extremely difficult. Correct? Okay. We have folks in the queue. Paul, were you up first?
I believe I was.
Okay,
yeah.
go ahead.
So I think what Nate said in the beginning was, irrespective of what we do with 8.1, this land use issue, where they are now disallowed, or still disallowed, and that was upheld by the court, really means that if you hate BRB or B&Bs or this model and you have a neighbor next to you, it's good news for the people that hate it. It's bad news that are in those zones, those natural resource zones, and it's bad news for the operators that are operating there today. And regardless of what we do with 8.1, you know, a complaint can be filed that we'll have to act on, essentially, period, no matter what we do here. So it's separate, as what I think Nate's trying to say. Nate's shaking his head up and down. So that might be good news for those, again, that are listening, and good and bad news for whatever your investment is. So getting back to 8.1, and as it applies to areas where it's allowed and not disallowed under state statute, or not statute under this court ruling, I would say that I appreciate staff's work. It was my intention that staff would take a stab at it, identify some key issues. I had offered to, and anticipated that we would bring back some proposals. I had talked to some experts that do this for a living, and they were happy to assist and give models and examples of what they do, what other jurisdictions are doing to refine this alternative proposal for areas in which, again, are allowed, where STRs exist today that are, again, allowed. So So I'm a little bit surprised that we didn't get that opportunity as here before us. So I think some further refinement something that I would support. So it almost be a slight modification to come back with a refined alternative proposal, and to try to do this in a way that does, again, not affect the bottom line of the county, the general fund, incorporate some of these ideas that have been used in other jurisdictions, and some expertise, and bring you back something that's more ready to go. That's my proposal. I don't know what everyone else has to say, but I think what Nate offered is good information for some, bad news for some others. And I appreciate staff at this point. Chair, your one point about the Airbnbs and the VRBOs and all those, and even these people that are willing to come in and talk to us that operate some of these, not quite a few, in the hundreds actually, have indicated to us that they're supportive of what we're trying to do here. It's the bad actors that are causing the problems. It's usually not them. It's an Airbnb. They want to clean up all these want to do a good job and have a good name, have a good reputation. So it's in their best interest. It's just the bad actors that we're trying to get at.
We have a couple more commissioners that want to speak to this. Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, this has been a sticky wicket. I have talked to some folks too, and they have enumerated to me how they get past enforcement issues. And one of them is they'll go online for a week and they'll get booked out for a year and then they go dark. So it's very hard to find them, quite frankly. It's very hard to determine because they're there and then they're not there. And I know for a fact that is how some of this has been operating. I don't like it. I don't think it's fair. However, in terms of enforcement, I would posit that we have 2 core services that are already, I think, poised to help out with issues of this kind when they find folks that are having a party at a house, and that would be, in my mind, code enforcement and our sheriff's office. And I think we might be better informed if we would look at this from the aspects of those 2 core services. What does the sheriff need, for example? A core service of what we do for public safety to make sure that when something gets out of hand with a rented house, legally or not, no matter where it is, that they are there to deal with an immediate problem, be it noise, be it rowdiness, be it firecrackers in a fire zone. I mean, the whole 9 yards. And then, isn't code enforcement authorized? Isn't this a code enforcement violation? And if it isn't, should it be? So, Gary, I'm looking at you. Should it be a code? And God knows, I've got to be honest,
Thank you.
No.
Thank you, Christina. I appreciate it.
As seeing my personal sense of the interminable redoing of code enforcement, which I really don't ever want to do again, but who knows, we may get there. It's been revised in over 20 years of work. And I'm assuming some of that is already under that umbrella. So, Dan,
would you like to make a comment?
Oh, I just am so excited to
I'm
be
just
up here.
glorious, Dan, glorious. Yeah, okay.
First and foremost, and I'm going to speak to the concerns that you raised, Commissioner Schrader, and the original concerns that you raised, Chair Smith. And I want to make sure we're conflating a couple of things.
Okay.
There seems to be this impression around, it's not, as it relates to this, there's a discussion around the use, and there's a discussion around an action.
Right.
Okay? And so let's talk about the use. Chair Smith raised the concern about what's our enforcement process as it relates to once this court case comes down or we get a call, is code enforcement going to go out there and shut them down? Let's talk about that first. Right now we have for those of you who have been here for a while, and for those of you who are newer or returning, we had a priority system in regards to our code enforcement components. And that was because the county was getting in between all these neighbor versus neighbor issues, and there's a priority list as we relate to code enforcement. current, and we can come back and revisit that with the board. We have no issue with doing so. But right now, this particular issue is at the lower end. It's not a life and safety issue. It's on the lower end of those priorities, okay? And just being open, honest, and transparent with you about where it lands. So right now, we're getting calls, or historically we get calls. It's like Jimmy next door is running a VRBO, running this, renting this house, and it's a low priority, okay? Now let's talk about it's the actions, though, that you're referring to. So the action is, it's midnight and they're having a party. That action is the fact that you are violating the noise ordinance. And that is a question then that is regulated through CCSO. They would contact CCSO to deal with that issue. The action, for example, could be, because we do enforce life, health, and safety concerns. So for example, if the concern was, they have the storage of excessive amounts of garbage on their site. That is an actionable offense. That is a solid waste violation. That is a priority within the Board of County Commissioners' objectives. Hence, we would take action on that. And that action does not mean, again, I want to make sure, and this goes back to kind of this 3 strikes discussion and kind of wrestling with that. We work through an abatement process. I mean, our code, as the board has directed us to do, is basically talk to individuals, engage them. Mm-hmm. We do alleged letters. Hey, it's been alleged that you have this problem. If you could correct it, that'd be great. We work with them to try to do that. It's not until a point where we have an enforceable action, essentially someone who does not want to partner with us and cooperate, that we actually go forward to violations and fees and fines and things of that nature. And so I'm just raising that because they're 2 distinct issues that are also dealt with by different agencies.
And a follow-up, so what it would sound like with code enforcement, that we'd have to change that priority as a policy for the bad actors, okay.
Well, the bad actors.
Or more than likely, it will be the percentage.
It would be the use. So you would basically have to tell staff to prioritize enforcement of VRBO, or I don't want to say that, short-term rentals.
Right.
As a priority. Now, our discussion we would have then back with you is that scope of work. We have intentionally been trying this. There was a reason for this priority list, and it was this. And I may get these numbers wrong, and if I do, I apologize. Historically, our code enforcement case numbers per individual, they have been, I think, as high as 250 per person on a running basis. And these are in consideration everything. They're geographically spread throughout the county. They have these zones they work in. Through the establishment of that priority list and efficiencies that group has put into their process, we've got that down below 100 in more manageable caseload. So we'd have to talk to you about, if you wish to do this, here are the impacts and here are the costs. Yep.
And also what would have to drop off as a top priority.
And there may be adjustments, correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So if we were, if we were to change the priority list on code enforcement and add more alleged infractions, where would the staff come from to implement that?
So the infractions, again, it's not just a code enforcement discussion. It's let's say any addition to that priority list would have to be evaluated, and its impact on caseload and the necessity for additional staff and what may be needed. Currently, right now, we have changed the modeling for that program over the last year in the budget cycle to meet with the county administrator's directive on the reduction of general funds. That is now an embedded cost within our programs that would have to then be further theoretically embedded into other departments for that cost. So say if it required 1 or 2 FTE, we'd have to embed it into a finance or tourism or whatever, because we're enforcing their rules and their regulations. Mm-hmm. And there would be additional costs for that. Which then, there may or may not be general fund associated with that, depending on who is embedding that. And that's a discussion to discuss with the county
could
commissioner.
you address that?
As you know, Commissioners, you have to reduce the general fund by $15 million over the next 1 or 2 fiscal years. So any new program you choose to use, spending general fund, you have to reduce even more somewhere else. So you don't have to spend general funds for this program, but where else is it coming from? There's not many resources left if you don't use general fund. Okay. That's why we talked about fees and fines for so many years, and why that's a struggle if you want to charge a fee.
And that's why I'm looking at this, we already have an existing program. But we would have to drop off another priority somewhere along the line, given our budget constraints. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. And is that something we want to consider rather than coming up with an entirely new program that,
I can't even begin to look you in the eye and tell you what that, I mean, we've estimated, I think, like 1,100. I think that was the number we had in our staff report.
yeah.
1,100.
What?
1,100 of these short-term rentals throughout the county. That's kind of our estimate.
So is it even that
And so
big? I mean,
the question would be then doing like data scrubbing with our friends in tourism to figure out how many are in the rural area, how many in the urban area, what that cost
okay,
is.
so it still would be an added cost. even
It would,
if you
there would be
prioritize
costs associated with it, yeah.
it. Okay.
Commissioner Fisher?
Thank you, Chair Smith. Just some basics, some questions that I had with when we were going over the alternative proposal. So looking at this, what I'm understanding, I just want to make sure I've got this correctly. Everything that we put together before under the standards, what's that called? Standards and conditions, all of that would come back into the code. That all would remain the same under this alternative proposal. You guys can shake heads just to make sure that I've got this right. So that would include that within the Portland metropolitan urban growth boundary, it would still be required to be one's own primary residence, because that's part of this standard and conditions. So that's part of this alternative proposal. Yes? So I'm just getting the lay of the land in aid of,
Will you come up and answer?
in aid of a question.
Come up and answer the question, please. Thank you, Everett.
Yes, Commissioner Fisher, I think you're looking at attachment B in the staff report. It's kind of a table of full repeal versus this alternative proposal. The first section does say that we would keep the sections on standards and conditions, applicability, and emergency revocation, and modify the sections on registration fees and enforcement. That is intended to be a guide for the board to see what a revised code would look like and what parts may
Okay, that's
remain.
what I was understanding. Now, my next question is, Nate came and talked to us about EFU land. So we kind of have this county, and we can all see it in our mind. We have the urbanized suburban areas, we have the EFU, exclusive farm use, and then we have more, let's look at Jim Austin back here. What's up on the mountain up there for, which might not fit into that. I think it would be really helpful if we could see a color-coded map as to who's excluded. I was just on Airbnb, if you look at me on my iPad. There is so many Airbnbs out there, and some of them are in exclusive farm use. I mean, it's all over the map. So what I'm wondering, and this is my question to my commissioners after we see this map, we know that industries are coming in, buying up properties and using them as a business model for Airbnb if it's not required to be owner occupied. They're buying them up and they're using them as it's a business. So why wouldn't we charge a fee in that sense? If it's a commercialized use, and I'm not talking about the individual that's renting out a room in their home, or the individual who may have another residence and they may Airbnb their home out for part of the year to help cover the costs. I'm talking about the commercialized purchase of homes for Airbnb. Why wouldn't we charge a fee to help cover these costs? But it would be helpful to have a map to see what's allowed where. Because I'm assuming it would be up mostly on the mountain. I'm looking at Jim Austin to shake his head yes or no. You don't know.
You have to come to the table to speak. We have 2 seats over here. Why don't Dan, Nate, Jim, come over here, please?
Jim, go ahead.
I'm not sure we're referring to short-term rentals as commercial use as in the code, and Nate, if you wanted to confirm or deny that.
Those don't open, Tony. You got to come to this side.
Paul, I see you in the queue.
Yeah, Paul might be able to answer this.
We'll see. We'll see. Jim, did you care to take a stab at that? And please introduce yourself.
Yes, Jim Austin with Clackamas County Tourism. And I apologize from Chair Smith from answering from the audience.
That's all right. That's
So
fine.
few people, it seems casual. Because we don't have the transient lodging tax registration information that's handled by the Finance Department, we don't have any information on owner-occupied. The Finance Department even doesn't collect that level of detail for short-term rental registrations, at least for the transient lodging tax program. I don't know how, there'd probably be a way to get that information, but it would probably be self-reporting, but there's nothing that exists now or a program that I'm aware of.
Okay, Nate Boderman.
I'll just say that, as part of our initial efforts, we went and, as Dan mentioned, tried to get our hands around what, where these were, how many of them were out there, and obviously the mountain is, going to be one of the areas where they're most highly concentrated. Just to Commissioner Fisher, to answer one of your questions, that area is outside of our resource zone, so it's not affected by the Court of Appeals decision. So anything that is up there potentially would be eligible to continue as a short-term rental, subject to whatever regulations you choose to impose. Furthermore, I'll just note that as we were going through the hearings initially, we really didn't hear much from folks that had short-term rentals in resource zones. Frankly, I recall maybe one person testifying, and the reason I think is one, there just aren't that many out there, but two, the impacts that typically cause conflicts with short-term rentals, are exacerbated in urban areas that are, in neighborhoods, right? And so the party houses, the garbage, the parking, isn't as likely to cause issues with neighbors when you're on large tract properties, right? For obvious reasons, and so it is a problem. They will be a non-permitted use, right? But I think those externalities or those nuisance impacts just aren't really an issue in the context of the types of issues that we've typically considered and people have typically raised or tried to make us aware of.
Yeah.
Can I expand?
Yes,
1 second.
please.
You did great, Nate. Just to expand a little bit, and I'm going to speak specifically to your concern, Commissioner Fisher, about the owner occupancy and the discussion that was just shared with you. The dialogue, though, is around that owner occupancy. If this program goes forward to some extent, it's basically simply going to be a part of the affidavit.
Mm-hmm.
You check the box, and theoretically, it's a strike if they lie on. If they lie on anything, and we take citizens' word on a variety of things, just the way we operate out of a place of trust, and that generally turns out to be good, sometimes not so good. But fundamentally, I want to make sure you understood about how that would be shared with us as a part of that registration process. And then secondly, you talked about
Can I ask a follow-up just to that before you go to your second part? But if it was an affidavit under penalty or perjury of law, that would be a crime to say something on a registration fee that was not true.
Correct.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure we were talking about the same thing.
Sure. We're talking about law. That's you. That's not me. Yeah. Secondly, you talked about a map. Our natural resource zones cover extensive areas of our county. Primarily there are forest lands and there are ag lands, and so you know where those areas are at. Mm-hmm. There's southern portions of our counties, there are western portions of our counties, and then the eastern portions of our county as well. Those are areas that are obviously not around our urban hubs. They're not around our rural communities, such as Government Camp and those areas, and they're not within cities. As Nate said, we didn't get a lot of testimony from folks that were operating. I can remember one at a tree house or something like that. But I would assume they are out there, and I would assume that you would hear concerns from some of those folks because you hear this farm to table kind of thing.
Stafford be?
Stafford, a lot of it's in our exception lands area. It's kind of that transition between our urban to our rural and our ag zones until you get further south. And you get further south, you get transitions into ag.
Mm-hmm. So they're not a natural resource zone, and they would not be within the Portland, or they are within the Portland urban growth boundary now?
No, they're outside the urban growth boundary, and there are large chunks of resource land, EFU land, in those areas. Yeah, when you're talking about the Stafford Triangle, I'm assuming, yeah.
In transition, but it would be nice to just have this. What are we really looking at here? Since those lands are prohibited, that really takes out a large chunk of, maybe not population areas, but definitely where these would be allowed.
Geographic areas, yes.
Mm-hmm. But I like Paul's idea. I always thought that heavily fining bad actors is a good way to get resources, that we shouldn't be lax on that.
I think the theory is good on that, Commissioner Fisher. However, the devil's always in the details. Do we have staff time available to do it? In any program that we implement, will it pay for itself? Did you want to make a comment?
If I could.
Yes, okay.
Specifically about that point, this discussion sounds a lot like marijuana. I'm going to be honest with you. And the discussion around marijuana was, how do you set these ridiculous fines that really limit their ability to do that work? And the nuances, our hands are tied to some extent on the scope of that fine. And so it has to be roughly proportional to the action. So we can't say for this action, we're going to make a $20,000 fine. Secondly, we go through an abatement process. And so that's a partnership with the property owner to abate the issue. Those fines are never realized until you have somebody who won't cooperate, and it gets to the point where we have to actually take them to through that process of
And then how do
compliance.
you collect once a court or whomever is in our favor? Collection of it is terrible, from what I understand.
Collection varies. We're actually working with collection companies now, et cetera, but it varies based on the individual.
In theory, I think maybe a program works, but when you get down to the reality of it, and let's just take a look at our public safety system for a minute. We have laws and laws and laws and laws and laws and laws on the books that if you do this, it's a crime. But yet, guess what, folks? We still have criminals running around committing crimes. I'm not equating that these are necessarily heinous crimes that our police force or sheriff's office would arrest people for necessarily. But just because we take an action and say, you can't have a party, we can't do this, it doesn't really mean anything. I don't think that we can control people's behavior by an action, any action, that a majority of these board members would approve of. And the second issue that I keep saying is enforcement will be difficult because of other issues that this board has passed regarding staff, a general fund, and so forth. I don't see how that we can possibly charge enough in this program to pay for all that's going to be necessary. But I'm sure people have other opinions. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. So I would like to just say that I wanted to bring this back in a more refined way that would demonstrate not just from theory, but from other areas, other jurisdictions that implemented something similar. So we don't need to reinvent a wheel or anything like that, because I think there's some examples we can use and some learned experiences we can bring into this. So I anticipated, again, bringing something back to you more refined with examples and actually having some people that have expertise in this who indicated they'd be willing to come talk to us. And I think it'd be a perfect setting to do that. We're not there today. But I think we can get there. I agree. I think everyone's concern here is that it can't cost the general fund any money. And if it turns out that maybe there is a modest fee that it takes to carry this over the edge, then great. But again, as a pilot, that's what we'll learn out of this. Whether we learn it right away or we put in some of those adjustments or levers in there, I think we can get there. And I think it's important enough to get in front of this that we heard over and over at these. I went to all of them, all the public sector. There's a cry out there. There's an outcry for people to say, please help us. We've got these challenges. One thing, Dan, when you were speaking and talking about life, health, and safety, that's precisely what some of these people are calling out. When they feel that their road is blocked, their emergency accesses are blocked, or I know we have Vector, right? We have a situation with people not taking care of their property, and there's Vector. That's health, life, and safety. That's a health issue. Now bears, granted, they're pretty big, right? But since this discussion, we've seen a lot of pictures of bears. Is that safe? Is that health, life, and safety? I would say that there are situations that would endear that consideration. So let's come back. I promise you, I will work on this and bring back something I think will answer some of the questions and bring some examples of where something like that works, or if I can't, I won't.
Okay. I want to turn the board's attention to attachment D in the package. It lists 4 counties and 2 cities who have made attempts to implement a program like this. Whether there are any other counties that have done this on a county-wide basis, I don't know. This board will take no action on this issue today. With that in mind, any closing comments? Gary, do you have something?
Yes, so you do have a second hearing of the repeal of the county code, chapter 8.10, short-term rentals, on September 9th. So you could either, can they postpone that second hearing, Nate? Do they have to hold it and then cancel it? Or, that's still going forward, right, Nate?
Correct. We announced that at the last hearing. I think certainly we could notice it. My mind is thinking, do we announce it and then postpone it at that time? That might be the best way to do it. But Gary, let's discuss. There's a mechanism to delay it.
My point is, we still have the scheduled second hearing on September 9th, 8th, which you could postpone or take action that night. So that is still coming forward.
Okay.
So do we make a decision about the September 8th hearing today?
Sounds like we need to do more
research?
More research and come back to you,
All
Commissioners.
right. Do more research and please bring it back to me and Commissioner Savas. Any other comments on this?
I just have one
Yes,
question.
Commissioner Scholl.
I think it'd be interesting to see of the 1,100 or so short-term rentals that you estimate are out there. Does finance have any indication of how many of them are already paying the transit lodging tax? That would be very interesting to know.
Can you answer that, Elizabeth? Okay, we'll get that answer to you,
Okay,
Commissioner.
thank you.
Commissioner Fisher?
That spurs another question. Can we also explore possibilities of if that transient lodging tax is being paid, that some of that could be utilized to cover the cost of this registration program?
It can't be. It's
Law
restricted.
restrictions.
Yeah, it's restricted. You can't use it.
Well, I know we talked about startup costs being utilized at one point, so.
Yeah, to the best, and Jim again with Clackamas County Tourism, Commissioner Fisher, to the best of, again, I'm not an attorney, but state statute provides for the provision for local governments to do transient lodging taxes, and there's definitions in statute about, that defines what tourism agencies are and what tourism, what the funds can be used for, and a business registration and regulatory program, to my understanding, does not fit into those statutory definitions.
Is that correct, Nate?
That's my recollection. They're restricted funds, but yeah, but we can get you the answer specifically.
Alrighty. Alrighty, thank you very much, Commissioners. Gary?
That is your last session for today, Commissioners.
Seeing no further business before this board, we are adjourned.